Excellent. Well, hello, everyone. I guess we can get started now. Welcome to this exceptional INSEAD AI Fireside Chat today. A quick introduction. I'm Karen KO, INSEAD MBA 14D, and I'll be your moderator today. So, a few little notes as we begin. Please be aware this session is being recorded. We're going to share this publicly on YouTube later, perhaps at the end of this week. And a little modification for today, we're going to have a little break in between our conversations for a short Q&A, and then wrap up our Q&A session at the end. So at any point during this discussion, feel free to type in your questions. I believe our guest speakers may also ask some questions, which you're welcome to type into the chat box. So let's get started. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest speakers, Natalia Burina and Kevin Pereira, who bring with them a wealth of experience and expertise in AI. So Kevin is a fellow INSEAD alum and the managing director at Blu Artificial Intelligence, an AI consulting firm based in Hong Kong. He's also a respected adjunct faculty and lecturer across numerous universities in Hong Kong, or in the APAC region, including University of Hong Kong and Hong Kong University of Science Technology, where he teaches courses on AI to MBA and undergrad students. Also joining with us is Natalia Burina, a pioneering AI product leader and investor at Storm Ventures with a distinguished career within the tech industry. So during her tenure at Meta, Natalia has managed a portfolio of very widely used AI products and technologies. And before Meta, Natalia also contributed to the early development of Salesforce, Einstein AI, spearheaded search at eBay, and launched the very first version of Microsoft Bing. So it's an honor to have Natalia and Kevin with us today to share their experience and insights on the future of talent management and in this crazy era of AI, and also, share their advice for INSEAD business leaders on how to navigate this rapidly evolving landscape today. So without further ado, how about we start with our first question for Kevin? As AI increasingly becomes prevalent in our daily lives and integrated into our work, how would you advise business leaders to think about human talent and how to remain competitive and adaptive?
Perfect. Thank you, Karen, for the question. And also thank you to the French INSEAD Alumni Association for having me. Really excited to be here. So for your question, Karen, let me take it in sort of two parts, right? So I think part one is for business leaders kind of in thinking about where to use AI. So I think that's kind of part one of the question. Right? Part two is how to integrate it with human talent. So let me take that as kind of part A and part B. So if I'm thinking about part A, right, AI and how business leaders should think about it, my view is, when it comes to AI is really a tool to achieve an objective. And if that's the case, then I think it's incumbent upon business leaders to think about what are the right uses for this specific tool. That the objective is actually really important. Like in our consulting work, we actually find that there are many companies that go out, buy some really cool AI, and then force it into a use case. And in my view, that's a horrible idea. You should always think about what is the business problem you have or the thing you're trying to solve, and then try to think about, is AI going to solve it, right? And sometimes the answer is AI can solve it, and in other cases, there may be other ways to do it that might be more cost efficient or might be more interesting as well. Like not everything, or I should say, AI isn't a silver bullet that can solve everything. So I think that's really important. So typically when we, go into our consulting engagements, right, with business leaders, we will typically, or I guess my question to them is, what keeps you up at night, right? And that way I get to find out from them, what is the worry that they have, what are business issues that they have, and then we start to think about, can AI actually solve it? Okay, so I think that's kind of one framework for business leaders to think about where they're going to use AI in their organizations. And then the second part of the question is really about, how do you integrate this with human talent, right? Which is really, I think, the point of why we're here today. And so I think there, at least in my opinion, the future is really about humans working together with the AI tools going forward. Right? I think things like ChatGPT, other tools that are popping up these days, I think they are showing us that that's probably the way of the future for the world of work. And so I think, therefore, one of the ways you really go about doing that is through education, right? So we're actually involved in a lot of education for companies. I get invited to come in and talk to them about how to use the tools. And I think for business leaders, the idea is what is the capability of this tool? And then I think for employees, it's thinking about how can I use this tool going forward, right? And I think if we think about it that way, then that at least provides business leaders with one way of thinking about where they're going to use a tool, where they're going to use this tool in their organizations. And then secondly, for the employees, it's really about thinking about where can I use it and how do I use it? Because you can go to ChatGPT, type in very simple prompts, for example, and then come up with okay sort of answers, or you can be very specific or use these tools in the right way and get output that's a lot better too. Right? So I think it's important that that business leaders think about how they're using these tools capability wise, and then for the employees to really understand how to best use these tools going forward.
All right. Thank you for that. Natalia, would you have a different perspective or?
I second everything that Kevin has said. I think one bit of nuance that maybe I can add as somebody who's built a lot of these AI systems is that AI is most effective when you actually combine it with humans. I think most people don't realize this, but even when you're building AI systems, there is a lot of human involvement that needs to happen in order to train the data. And then as you're building AI products, the most effective and best products are the ones that work in harmony with humans. And so once you get that right, both from a builder perspective, but also as the perspective of a business leader who's trying to upskill their workforce, best AI is when you have the combination of those two rather than just one. So that's one little thing I just want to add. Otherwise, Kevin, thank you for a fantastic answer.
Excellent. Well, there's no denying, though, there's been plenty of reports that have been published in the last year or so talking about the jobs that will disappear, right? Now, it's true, we probably shouldn't focus only on just the fact that, yes, there will be jobs disappearing, but much like how the internet at the dawn of internet, they also created many new jobs and opportunities. And I understand that it is a difficult thing to forecast, but in your opinion, Kevin and Natalia, you're welcome to jump in here. You know, as AI is transforming the way we work today, what are some of the emerging job opportunities or roles that you foresee perhaps being created in the near future? And then more importantly too is, you know, if you have any specific recommendations for how businesses can prepare for this shift.
Okay, so Karen, I appreciate that you're delving right into the fear and the issues that many people have, right? So as someone who's working in the field, we get this all the time. What's going to happen to my job? I'm really worried. You know, how should I think about this? So, you know, there's a saying out there that I've heard quite a bit, and I relate a lot to, is that, you know, that you probably won't be necessarily replaced by AI, but you might be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI, right? And I don't think that's 100% true for everything, but in general, I think that's actually a very good way to look at it. Because if you start to use the tool, right, I think what ends up happening is that the person, like Natalia was saying, that combination, when that person A is helping to design the tool and B also using it, I think they become a much more effective worker in the future. Whether it's efficiency gains, whether it's actual productivity improvements, whatever it is, I think it's important to have that combination going forward. And I think one of the ways, again, that we see this all the time is that companies are now trying to use education to tell their employees and show their employees how they can use these tools to A, reduce the fear, and B, also to get them a bit excited about it as well, right? Because these tools open up new possibilities that we've never had before. Like even for the INSEAD Association in Hong Kong, right? We actually had a workshop on Gen AI, and a lot of people came in with a lot of fear at the beginning. And after I sort of forced them to use some of these tools, I think they started to realize, hey, it's actually not as sort of far off as I thought before. And I think one of the benefits is that a lot of these tools today are what we call no code and low code tools, meaning that you don't need programming and you don't need coding to use them. Because I think before, a lot of people thought AI is really not sort of in my area because I don't code and program, so I can never use it, right? And I think the good thing is through education and a lot of these no code and low code tools, I think more people are losing some of that fear. So I'd encourage everyone on the call today, if you're not using these tools, go try and play with them, right? If you're worried or embarrassed about the output, do it in the privacy of your own home, right? Get the AI to build that picture, get the large language model to give you that text output. I think the best way to learn these things is actually by playing with it. And I think something else that should hopefully make people feel a little less afraid of what's coming with jobs is that I do think that the best users of these tools are the people who have domain-specific expertise and know how to use the tool, right? So often when we see this new AI coming, I think people underestimate the value of their domain expertise. You out there might have been working in your job or your area or your industry for the last 5 or 10 years. That experience is actually really useful, right? I mean, one of the analogies I often have with these large language models and these tools is think of them like an inexperienced intern, okay? They can do a lot of the work for you, but they do not have the experience that you have, which means you have to guide them going forward, right? So I think in terms of reducing the fear, I think it's important to keep that in mind. Your domain expertise is really useful. And secondly, I encourage you to use the tools. Now, if you want a framework, right, for thinking about jobs and how things may change, both for yourself and then also for your organization, let me throw out one that I think is actually quite useful. And I think when it comes to AI and jobs in the future, I don't think it's about job automation, Karen, but I think it's about task automation, right? So every job consists of certain tasks. Some of them are easy to automate and some of them are hard to automate. So I think when we see jobs changing, what's going to happen, I think in the future, is the AI is going to come in and take away the easy to automate stuff. And that's going to leave the things that are hard to automate. And so let's say there's a hypothetical job. 7 of these tasks are easy to automate, 3 are hard to automate. So what's going to happen is AI is going to come in, take away the 7, and leave the human with the remaining 3. Okay, so in terms of job evolution going forward, the question for HR, talent management in the future is for these roles, do we get the human being to concentrate 100% of their time on the remaining 3 tasks, or do we add new tasks into that job? And I think that's an open question, that certain jobs will go certain ways. But I think that's one way to think about job evolution in the future. And so I'm excited about that. I think the other thing that you also mentioned is that whenever we've had new technology come in, you tend to see new jobs created that never existed before, right? I think that's also exciting as well. And so the question, I think ultimately what we're sort of getting to is how do we prepare ourselves, A, for the job evolution, and B, also for the new job creation. I think this is where it really gets interesting. And so to kind of provide some thoughts for the group, I think one of the things we can do as human beings is get good at the things that are hard to automate, right? So if I think about a category of tasks that fall into that bucket, I think human-to-human interaction is a really, really big, right? And I think, if you think about critical thinking, if you think about public speaking, all of these sort of human-to-human interaction type of skills are actually very difficult to automate. Right? So my advice is start to get good at these things. And I think that will be helpful in the future to cover yourself from a skill perspective for both the new jobs that are there and also the jobs that are going to evolve. One final caveat before I kind of finish up is that also when you think about AI, right, it's getting better exponentially, which means what's hard to automate today might become easy to automate tomorrow, right? So with that in mind, I think something that we all have to take on board is get really, really good about continuous learning, right? Because we're going to have to continuously evolve. AI is going to get better. The AI is going to do certain things. And that means we as human beings have to evolve as well. I think before you could maybe do one career for your whole life, you'd be fine. Now we need to be really mindful. And I think learning, as I found out when I was doing my GMAT in preparation for INSEAD, if you don't consistently keep learning, you kind of lose it. It's like a muscle, right? And so that's why I encourage everybody, keep that continuous learning muscle going. I think that'll be really helpful in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing that framework and perspective. Although you kind of avoided my question in terms of maybe throwing out a few predictions
Sure.
regarding
So
possible,
yeah,
maybe, not necessarily good or untrue, but possible
sure.
job opportunities or roles that don't exist today. It's always
Yeah,
curious
so
to
let me
see what people think.
Yeah. So Karen, let me throw out one, right, that I think is quite interesting. And this actually comes from recently when I gave a talk at my high school to the philosophy students.
Okay.
Right. So they actually had the same question. They said, Kevin, what do you think are going to be new and interesting jobs in the future? And they actually threw one at me, which I thought was quite interesting, was the idea of someone who's called an AI ethicist. Right. So in essence, and you can argue about the labeling, right? But the function is actually looking at a role within an organization that looks at the right way to use AI. Right. And that's not about it in the technology sense, but in terms of thinking about the impact on employees, the impact on customers, the impact on wider society. And that person would be responsible for thinking about, is the company using AI in the right way? Right? And then the philosophy students kind of threw up AI ethicists. And they were saying that philosophy students might be best equipped for that role because in the study of philosophy, they look at moral frameworks, they look at values, they look at like the sort of tools that you could use to judge the right way of using it. So as an example, AI ethicists never existed before because we never had AI, used that much. But now in the future, we might need somebody at these companies to really be that, judge is the wrong word, but that person who's responsible for thinking about how to use AI in the right way. So I'll kind of throw that one out as a potential prediction.
Ethical and responsible AI is definitely a hot topic at the moment, a huge concern globally. And Natalia, I know you come from a more product driven perspective. I'm sure you also have a few insights into or opinions into what the future of work and job opportunities could emerge in the coming years or sooner too.
Yeah, so I think one Uber observation that I'd like to make, and this is how I look at the broader landscape, is in the future, there are going to be companies that die because of AI. They're entirely disrupted. So an example of this might be companies that all they do is provide human services. So we recently saw a disruption in customer service. There's actually a French company called Teleperformance that was disrupted by AI. All they do is provide call center agents. And so what you're seeing is a disruption of kind of the lower level, more basic jobs that can be entirely automated. And the value is really moving up the chain. So it's the combination of people who can use AI with that is really where it's going to win. So one, companies are going to die. Two, companies are going to adapt and they're going to adopt AI. And then finally, three, we're going to see a whole new set of companies that are AI first. But to go back to your question, one really big gap that I see today is that there's not enough technical talent to implement AI in companies. And so right there, that is a really big opportunity. And in fact, typically what happens is the foundation model providers are still providing professional services to fill this gap today. But that's one big area of opportunity that's there. So I think overall there's a big shift in all of this. And then the other part of this question was recommendations for how organizations can prepare for the shifts. The biggest, I think, and the most important thing that business leaders can do is adopt a mindset of experimentation. They really have to experiment into figuring out how AI is going to help their business. And this is a different model from prior business. You have to take your time and iterate into it. I'll get into this a little bit more later, but I'll leave you with that for now.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is very true, actually. I think several reports have already noted that the lower tier of jobs are the ones at most highest risk. Now, let's see. I guess it's going to be your turn, Natalia. So let's see. As We know there's many companies right now that are starting to explore how, right, to implement AI within their organization. I'm not sure many of them have actually gotten this right either, but as AI adoption and integration becomes increasingly imperative for certain businesses, perhaps not all, right? In your opinion, what strategic options do business leaders have when implementing AI within their organizations? And also, and additionally, what considerations should they prioritize?
Great. Let me start with a little story. And maybe some of you have heard the story before. So there's a story of two salesmen who went abroad in 1900s to see if there's an opportunity to sell shoes. Bear with me. I'm going to make this relevant. So these two salesmen ended up in a place where people traditionally don't wear any shoes at all. And they sent telegrams back home. And one of them wrote, "Situation hopeless. Stop. They don't wear shoes." And the other one wrote, "Glorious opportunity. They don't have any shoes yet." And so I think there's a similar situation with AI, because some people think that it's just hype and others believe that it will change everything. I mean, a third of the companies today aren't even using any AI at all. And so what I want to start off with, I want to ask the audience a question here. How many of you are building AI already? Are you building it? Do you plan to build it, or no plans at all? Please put an answer in the box.
Yes. And please let me know also if you have any issues with the chat feature. Let's see.
So let me repeat the question. How many of you are building AI already? Already building it? Okay, we have using it. That's interesting. Building it, okay. Planning on building it or not planning at all. Using it. Okay, great. So people are using it or building it. Great. And let me go into the next question. How are you implementing AI today? Do you have pre-existing platforms, bespoke AI solutions, both, or you're not sure? Both. Okay, great. Microsoft. Both Microsoft is a pre-existing solution. All right, I see people are doing both. Awesome. So in terms of, let me go back to the question. I apologize. I'm a bit sick. So let me talk a little bit about what's happening in the industry. So what is the broader picture? How are business leaders thinking about implementing AI, and what are their options? So I mentioned, first, to take a step back. So what the latest crop of AI can really do three things really well: produce creative content, read, process, summarize faster than people ever could, and then it can interact with the world to complete tasks faster. And primarily the value is in productivity gains, decreasing costs, and increasing revenues. So what are the options? There are really three different options. There's either existing cloud providers, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and this is what most business leaders are using today. There are model providers, so this is the OpenAIs of the world. That's another set of things. And then thirdly, there's open source, which is a brand new thing. And there are companies that are opting for that. In general, business leaders want optionality, they want security, and they want control of their systems. So that's what's happening out in the industry today. But if you're in a situation and you have to make some choices around this, really the approach to this, to figuring it out, is one, to understand the broader picture of where the industry is moving. Two, to identify the opportunities, which is really, really difficult. And then three is to execute on them correctly. So let me take those one by one. in terms of the broader picture, adoption is happening quickly, but there's still a lot of adoption that needs to happen, especially in B2B. So what we've seen is AI researchers have been on the forefront of everything. Then it's been the people who are building the infrastructure. Then it's been some of the product companies. So this is like OpenAI with ChatGPT, the Midjourneys of the world, some of the consumer products. But the big opportunity today is really in the enterprise. Enterprise still has yet to catch up and adopt a lot of this. And they're rushing in. The budgets for AI are skyrocketing, but it's still early days. And the way to think about this is, when we first had the internet, it took a really long time for pictures to load. And it was not possible to build a photo sharing app if your pictures are loading slowly. So we're in a similar place with AI. A lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the underlying tools still need to mature in order for businesses to take full advantage. So that's the broader picture. It's coming, but there are a lot of pieces that you need to put in place. Now, on the second piece, so one, broader picture, two, you need to identify the opportunity, and then three, executing. Identifying the right opportunity, again, hard, and one of the biggest reasons why companies are not adopting AI. It's really important to understand how it's going to help your business. And so it's very different if you're a consumer or B2B, if you're a big company or a startup. If you're a big company, your goal is really to grow and protect the business, right? If you're a startup, you need to survive. You need to figure out how to survive. So let's just take the big company because that's a lot of where the budgets are. And really, this is about matching the use case and making sure you can get the right value. And going back to, I think what I mentioned before, most of the value from AI today for B2B is improving productivity. So how can you help improve productivity? So how can you, so for example, GPT-3, we'll take that one as an example, but there's so many models, was found to increase productivity by 12%, increase speed by 25%, and quality, right? Secondly, decrease costs. So what does this mean, right? Well, this mostly means, I'll give you an example. You can now generate content faster and cheaper using generative AI. You don't have to do all of these things by hand. And that was very expensive. And there are companies that are getting disrupted from this. Thirdly, increasing revenues. What is an example of that? In sales, generative AI can identify leads and follow up and do all of this automatically. And so this is, again, it's the automation of a lot of things that humans used to be able to do. So again, I would think about, as you're identifying opportunities, really be mindful about what it means for your business and how it can impact the key goals of your business. And then thirdly, on execution, this in itself is very hard. I'll leave this for the next question. But to make a long story short there, prototyping is easy. Putting things in production is very hard. So I'll probably go into a little bit of that in the next piece.
Thank you so much, Natalia. You brought up something that I just read recently also from, I guess, the Harvard Business Review about, prompt engineering is dead and how we should be thinking about problem constraint design. When you talked about one of the biggest challenges being diagnosing the problem for companies. Just out of curiosity, I'm essentially getting a little ahead of myself, adding a question ahead. But would you have a framework or advice or guideline for business leaders in terms of how they can diagnose their problems within their organization? Because we know that many of us have been trained, to bring solutions, not bring problems, right?
Let me make sure I understand the question. How to diagnose problems within the company?
Organization that could be potentially solved with AI.
Yeah, so I think, again, here, it's really about approaching things with a very experimental mindset. And the thing that people still need to kind of catch up on, AI has been around for a really long time, but AI is probabilistic. And so the very first version you have is going to suck, right? It's going to not be good. But you really have to experiment into figuring out what are the right problems that it can solve for you. And the way to do this, nowadays we have all of these tools that make it easy. Like the big thing with generative AI that I think nobody really talks about is it makes AI implementation so much easier. This is why it's such a big deal. With foundation models, you can now do things faster. Like before, you used to have to do everything from the ground up in terms of AI development process. You can quickly experiment. And so what I would do when I'm thinking about whether or not to implement, I would think about the broader picture. Is your business threatened by the AI wave? I talked about those three types of companies, the ones that are going to die, the ones that are going to adopt, and the ones that can can build from the ground up, right? Is your company going to be disrupted completely? Go all in. You know, if an example of this is if you have a business based on stock images, like these are now can be generated with AI, you have to go all in and invest everything, right? Secondly, maybe you won't be completely disrupted right away. It's going to take time. So then it's a question of adoption, right? So then it's a question of, kind of one of the first questions we talked about, where does it fit in? Do you build or do you buy? And to figure out, whether you should build completely from scratch or buy or do a combination, you have to experiment into it. And the key thing with experimentation is from the very beginning, you have to be very clear and crisp around what that experimentation time is going to do for you. What are the outcomes that you want? What do you want to measure? Unless you know what to measure, this is not going to work. You encode the value of the business from AI by what you measure. So you have to very carefully pick how you're going to measure the effect of the experimentation. As you're experimenting, time box it. Otherwise, it's going to go forever. Developers famously don't like to give deadlines. They take forever to finish. I've been a developer myself. We know how this goes. Time box it. Be very clear about what you're getting out of it or not. And then you have to figure out what is that line between what you need to build in-house. Obviously, building in-house, you have full control, you have full security, but it's very expensive. Like, do you really need that for your business? And that execution piece is so fundamental. And I think a lot of the trouble that companies run into is not having the right people who understand this development process with AI. It's very different. You have to be very mindful and very thoughtful and approach this, again, in an experimental fashion, but still with a very, very business mindset.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And Kevin, in your work experience, what have you seen also?
Yeah, absolutely happy to share, right? So I think, with regards to like the business problems themselves, I actually think business leaders generally know quite well what problems they have, right? I think the question often becomes, what are good candidates for AI to solve? So along those lines, relating to your question, I think tasks or situations where there's like a repetitive element, right? And the answers are more black and white rather than needing human judgment, right? So anything that I think is very kind of clear, black and white, generally tends to be good candidates for AI. Anything that also requires scalability as well, right? Because if you're only going to use the AI once or twice, it probably doesn't make sense to invest a lot of money to build a model to figure it out. But if this thing is going to be used thousands of times over and over again in a repetitive fashion, that's a really good candidate or task or area for AI to actually be used as well. So I think when business leaders are thinking about, hey, here are the many ways or areas I can use AI, think about black and white, think about repetitive, and also think about scalability. And I think if you can get those kind of pieces there, generally AI is a good candidate for that specific area. I think maybe one other piece, Karen, you also asked about was considerations, right? So what should business leaders take into account? I also think data, and Natalia alluded to this as well, but I think data is also quite important. And I think for different industries, they view data in different ways. So in our consulting work, I'd say our big industries are probably healthcare, financial services, retail, manufacturing, and energy, right? But those industries actually look at data very differently. Now, the common theme is that they are industries that sit on a lot of data, but healthcare and financial services are really strict about their data. Like they do not want anybody or any chance of that going anywhere. Like for our consulting work, they often ask us to come to their data center, no USB, we can't use our own computers, we have to use everything in their environment. Whereas there are other industries that are a little bit more lax about it. It's not like they want everybody to see their data, but their attitude towards it is a little bit more open, right? So I think something else business leaders should keep in mind in terms of like those constraints is actually what is the sensitivity of data, and keep that in mind when utilizing AI and looking at potential use cases as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think one couple of points to add to the data aspect of it. The data story, going back to the framework and strategy, figuring out your data story is the key thing to do before you even start experimenting or implementing any AI. And traditionally, data in enterprise has been siloed. So you really have to figure out how to get it all together, put it together, make sure it's clean data, high quality data, and that it's well formatted. It's really all about the quality of the data. There's a saying, garbage in, garbage out. So if you have high quality data, you're going to get good AI. That's one point. And then the second point, I think, again, most people don't think about this much because it's something that's kind of in the purview of people who develop AI. But human annotations are a key part of making AI products, right? So how can you get high quality human annotations? So you need human annotations to help you judge how good AI is. So on the training part, it's just so crucial. And this is a really big bottleneck um, in the industry right now. We've basically used up the entire internet. We're running out of public data to build these models that give fantastic results, but we're bottlenecked on human annotations that can give us high quality results.
That's actually very interesting that you've added. Out of curiosity, is there any, I guess, leads or you could say advancement on that front? Or is it something that is perhaps best left to every individual company as they work on building perhaps their own AI or customizing an AI LLM to their needs?
Do you mean getting the human
Human
data?
annotation, right?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways. There's no perfect answer, and it depends on kind of, what you need to do. But there's a different number of different methods for this. You can create your own data. You can go brute force. There are companies that you can hire to help you get this data. So you can do it in-house, you can outsource it. There's huge industry and a lot of up and coming companies help get this human annotated data. You can buy annotated data, high quality data. It really depends. You have to balance this with, how important it is and what is the budget. But yeah, there's many. Now, another method is synthetic data. So that's actually a really big area that a lot of people are looking into. Can you use machine generated data to help out with some of this? Again, this is one of those things, there's no right answer. It depends on your business, and you have to experiment into it, and you have to figure it out. But the value is definitely in the data, right? That's where the moat is for any company, and that's a crucial thing to understand when you're thinking about how you're going to implement AI and where everything's moving.
No.
And I think the synthetic data, Karen, just to add a little bit on Natalia's point, we were actually talking recently to some like autonomous vehicle folks who are making their self-driving cars, and they were talking to me about sometimes for some of their training using high quality video games right, to be able to help train their models. Because I'm not sure if the audience here are gamers, but there's a game out there called Grand Theft Auto. Ironically, in the game, the idea is to create carnage and blow stuff up and do really bad things at a city. But the funny part, or I guess the useful part for the AI perspective, is that the rest of the traffic and the rest of the city follows all the rules, right? So if the AI actually plays a video game, actually sees what other people are doing, gets to recognize that when a traffic light goes to red, I need to stop, you can actually get a lot of value in terms of training, right? But at the same time, you do it at a fraction of the cost. Now, in real life, though, there might be a little kid that runs across a road, which doesn't happen in a video game. So you can't train everything there. But to Natalia's point, synthetic data and using machine-generated data can actually dramatically reduce the cost, right? So for your specific industry, sometimes it might be useful to think about, are there other cheaper, more efficient ways to get data? And does that training data resemble the real world? Because that's important, right? If your training data resembles the environment or the real world kind of application, then it's useful. But if, for example, Grand Theft Auto happened in space with like cars floating all over the place, it would be completely useless from an autonomous vehicle perspective. So I think that's just something business leadership keep in mind to think about. Are there other data sources that we can use to potentially get our AI smarter and also maybe more cost efficient as well?
That's a very good point. Thank you so much for that ad. All right. Now we're on to our last question. This one's for you, Natalia, because you've had an incredibly extensive career building AI products from Meta, Salesforce, eBay, Microsoft, and you currently now advise and invest in AI startups. So I was wondering if you would be able to maybe share a story with us, and from your experience and what insights also that you've drawn from your experience and how business leaders can effectively evaluate and determine market fit for the AI products within their respective industries.
Yeah, I think great question. And I would separate this out into, there's a question about what about AI for innovation and not only for improvement.
Yeah.
So from my current perspective, I look at this, from two sides, and I'll call it the buyer side and the seller side. And so it's kind of like the enterprise, the mature companies that are adopting AI versus the up and coming startups that are building and innovating from scratch. And they're two very, very different problems, right? And again, from the perspective of enterprises, what we're seeing is there's a tremendous amount of money. Like the budgets for generative AI are just skyrocketing. There is a hunger, but it's also very difficult because a lot of the infrastructure is old and needs to be updated. The tooling is undergoing change. There are organizational issues you have to work through. You have to, change the culture and the mindset of the companies, and it can be done. And I'll talk about Meta for 1 second. I think the crazy thing about working at a company like Meta is that there's two things. One, they have the data and they've been collecting it. And again, this is the key thing you need. And then two, everything they build is completely custom and bespoke, all the way down to the data centers. And so they have full control of everything, right? But this is not the usual enterprise case. Usually in enterprise, you have to, going back to the question, you have to figure out, are you going to buy? Are you going to build? Are you going to do a combination of those things? And what does it mean for your business? So, from a Meta perspective, we have everything in house. We have like some of the best people. They're very spoiled now. Looking back on this, and so it's very easy to put out AI products. It's very easy to do research to production, of which I have many stories. One, yeah, I won't go too much into that one. But let me focus on and big companies. There's a company called Klarna, which recently redid their customer service and did so with great success, and they were able to have enormous cost savings, and they were able to cut costs. And so, but most of all, they're able to satisfy their customers and provide better customer service by including AI, right? So that's kind of like that bucket. Now let's talk about the innovation case, because that one is very interesting. So this is all about figuring out how do you get to product market fit. And to anchor it, it really means you need to, let's say you're innovating, building something brand new. It's really about how can you get paying customers, how can you get real usage, and how do you get people to like your product enough to share it with others. So that's fundamentally what you need to crack. And the way, if you're building an AI innovation, what you really have to figure out is something that I call the data network effect. Then I didn't come up with this. This is a well-known thing in the AI circles. And what the data network effect means for AI products is that AI is valuable when it gives accurate answers, recommendations, and suggestions. But in order to get that, you really need lots of data that must be kept fresh. So the more users you have, the more people use the product, the more data you have. And enterprises run into a problem here. They have users, but they don't record their data. So this is a problem for a lot of the big companies. They don't have systems where they track their data and keep it around. You'd be shocked. Even some of the well-established companies are missing this a lot of times. So one, you need people who use the product. You need to keep collecting the data. 3, you need to keep improving the models. And again, human annotation, I talked about this one, is a big piece of this one. And then the more you do this, the more your products will improve. So really the key to figuring out how to build successful AI is this virtuous cycle of the data network effect. And that's how you can build defensibility. You create your own data and you create your own value that's specific to your business. And to me, that's really fundamentally the crux of successful AI.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, Kevin, would you have anything to add to that also?
Yeah, maybe one quick thing, right? In terms of the evaluation and improvement of models, and maybe this is for the audience here who have used, let's say, ChatGPT or some of the large language models, you'll notice that when you get output from these things, at the bottom, there's a thumbs up and a thumbs down, right? And that's actually something that kind of in the industry called reinforcement learning with human feedback. So the idea is when you get output from a large language model, you either say, hey, this is good, or this is bad, right? And so building that feedback mechanism, sort of building off what Natalia said, is actually really important. But I think when you have something like that, you need to be very clear about what criteria are you grading for, okay? So as an example, with something like ChatGPT, when they designed it so that they have something that's conversational, right? So a conversational chatbot. And that doesn't, or sometimes that conflicts with the idea of having accurate output, right? So there's this issue with a lot of AI, which we call a hallucination. Long story short, it's basically AI making stuff up, right? But when our friends at OpenAI built ChatGPT, they wanted to make something conversational. And when they used reinforcement learning with human feedback, the criteria for their internal people was, is the output conversational? If it is, kind of hit thumbs up. And if it isn't, thumbs down. So now when people use large language models like ChatGPT and Claude and whatnot, you find it's a very kind of conversational experience. And so they've optimized the model for that, and they've used their feedback mechanism to make it good at that, right? But that also means that sometimes you get this hallucination problem as well. So I think Natalia is really on point here. And the important part is when you improve and how you're trying to do it. Because based on that mechanism, you could get very different types of end results.
Okay, thank you for that also. Believe we're almost approaching our end time. Should we take questions right now? And I guess for those that are still on, if you have any questions for Natalia and Kevin, this is the time to ask. I mean, I see that we have a question about AI for innovation, which Natalia, you have briefly addressed that also. I'm wondering, Kevin, if you would have anything that you would like to add to that too. On
the innovation side.
AI for innovation question.
Yeah, so I think that's a question from Claude, right? So Claude, thank you very much for the question. So, I think innovation in AI is an interesting one. Many different ways to answer this, but there was a professor at my undergrad university who actually looked at AI's impact on innovation. And in her study, and I can find the paper and send it to you guys, but what she did is she classified innovation into two buckets. So bucket one was novel innovation, and bucket two was recombination innovation, meaning take existing ideas that already are there and then combine them in a new way to create something completely different. And what she found in kind of her research was, in terms of novel innovation, AI was terrible, right? Because there's no track record for something that hasn't been thought about before. So generally, AI kind of struggles with the novel innovation. But where it started to excel was actually on the recombination side, because there, what happens is there's already track record for component A, component B, component C. And so the AI is actually very easy or can easily take a bunch of different components, combine them in a different way to create something really new. Okay, so I think when you're talking about innovation, Clark, it's important to think about what type of innovation are you looking for. And I think generally in terms of those two buckets, recombination and novel, AI struggles with the novel, but AI does fairly well with the recombination innovation.
We also have another question for you, directed to you. What are the tools that what are the tools you are suggesting us to try out and play with beyond ChatGPT?
Yeah, I think that's from Aaron, right? So Aaron, thanks for the question. So I think if we talk about generative AI, because I think that's where your question is coming from, when we look at generative AI, there's a few different modes of output that you see. So one of the Gen AI output is text. You've also got pictures, and then high level, you've probably got sound and video as well, right? So those are kind of the main sort of ones I see from Gen AI. In terms of the ChatGPT part, so let's say text. The other ones I just personally like from my personal experience of using it. So I really like Claude from Anthropic, right? So I think it's quite good. There's a few different kind of versions of that, so I suggest that one. And then also Llama from Meta, I've used it as well. And on a few of the tools that you can use that are publicly available, you're actually able on one platform to give the same prompt to a bunch of different large language models. So at the same time, you can see the output that's coming in from a few different ones. So over in Hong Kong, we have something here called POE, P-O-E. It's an aggregator. It stands for Platform for Open Exploration. It's available at poe.com. And there, you can actually go in and use a bunch of different large language models to get output from many different LLMs. Right? So I think that would be one suggestion I would have. In terms of images, I personally really like Midjourney. It creates very realistic output, so I'm generally quite a fan of Midjourney. On Poe, you can also use another image generator called Stable Diffusion XL. I personally think it's not as good. The quality of the pictures is a bit worse, but it is a free tool. So if you've never generated an image with AI before, go in, have a bunch of fun with it. It's actually really fun to play around with, and you'll get a sense for what can work well, what can work not so well. So I can go on for this for about hours. So those would be my two kind of quick suggestions.
Excellent. I have a question here I see from, where did it go? Oh, from Raghu, I believe. He's a current MBA student at INSEAD, and I guess he has questions. I'm trying to see if I can see the chat again. I just accidentally clicked something.
Is this the one for when it comes to data, are big companies using their own servers? I think we haven't looked at that one yet.
Here, I got it, I think. Did I see it?
Yeah, Natalia, I think that's the one.
Yeah, so let me read out the question. So thank you for the question, Raghu. When it comes to data, are big companies using their own servers or considering setting their own data servers for privacy, or they will adopt cloud resources and become dependent on tech giants like Google, Amazon, or Microsoft? So the trend for the most part is actually to go through the big tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft and get the foundation models there. And primarily the reason for that is because people are very comfortable with the tech giants in the enterprise, meaning they provide a lot of security, they have privacy guarantees. And so that is primarily how enterprises are adopting AI today. However, things are changing quickly. Just over a year ago, Meta open sourced its models. And so this is having it's a big paradigm shift for everything. And I will say one of the other things we're seeing, especially in Europe, is a lot of companies still want things on-prem. They want to maintain everything in-house. And that's where the open source models really shine. And people are building things from the ground up. There are a lot of startups and companies that help enterprises do this. This is a really hot area. They're seeing a lot of investment opportunities for startups, helping enterprises adopt and customize AI. And again, it's because enterprises want optionality, they want control, they want security, they want to avoid lock-in. So this is, I think, that's where we are today, but things are changing quickly and a lot of opportunity in the space.
Maybe if I could just add a few components there, Raghu. And I know you're an INSEAD MBA student, right? So I know the global mindset's quite important kind of in the program, having gone through it. And so something that's interesting for Asia, right, is that there are certain countries, for example, that have restrictions on which tool you can use. So like, for example, certain vendors will put like geo kind of fencing around some tools. So I think another consideration also is which country that you're in. I think that sometimes has an effect on what you're able to use. And just from my own kind of experience, right? Those industries which I said before, like financial services and healthcare, which have very sensitive data, they very much line up with Natalia's kind of view on on-prem. So for example, Hong Kong Exchange, right, which is a stock exchange in Hong Kong, they actually have their own physical data center. They don't use any of the other stuff. There's actually like, a little island. They basically got their data center on that island and they exclusively use it for what they do. Now they basically are running every transaction of every stock over the Hong Kong Exchange. So they need to have a really on-point system that they control. So I think it really does come down to the business, right? And based on the business needs, the business requirements, and also the countries they're in, that I think shapes in many cases how they think about their tech stack and their data infrastructure.
Yes. Thank you for that. I see two questions regarding career, but before we dive in, there's one that is directed towards for you, Natalia, in terms of for those that are building B2B SaaS products where we process client data. Do you have any insights into what moat could look like from a technology perspective?
So I think nobody will dispute that data is the moat, proprietary data. So you may be processing client data, but there may be ways to create unique and proprietary data sets about how things are done. The other moat is, I mean, this is always, you think about like how companies succeed or die is execution, right? Just doing a really good job, and it's difficult, finding out the opportunities and executing on them. And where I see a big opportunity here is going AI first, meaning solving business problems with the perspective that you're going to need AI from the very beginning. It's a very different approach to building products. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think over time, we're going to see AI first B2B companies that are going to overtake current incumbents who cannot adapt quickly enough. But I'm a big believer in AI first companies. And what I mean by AI first, let me be specific about that, is having a good story about your data from the very beginning, being very mindful about creating proprietary data sets, having a good tech stack, which is difficult because the tech stack is just constantly changing right now. Everything's in flux, all the way down to like the chips and data centers. But these are the things you need to do when you're building AI first. And again, fundamentally different approach. I think one last thing I'll mention with the AI first approach, you have to be very, very mindful that because AI is probabilistic, you're going to have errors and mistakes. And what you need to build into the system are user controls to handle cases when things don't go well. And be kind to people, explain to them why AI gave them an error, and really be able to direct them to a human when AI doesn't work, because that will definitely happen with AI. It's never 100%, it's never bulletproof. We talked about hallucinations. There's ways to control all of those things. So it's like AI is very powerful, but you have to find ways to control it and have good fallback systems when things fail.
Backing on that, there's another question. From a new product perspective, is there any room for vertical industry-specific AI products? And Nicola goes on to ask, most good AI companies built foundational AI models, and if models can be replicated by these generic AI, would the only differentiator for these industry-specific products be access to control of data? And if so, how do data network effects work?
Is there any question for me?
It could be for either you or Kevin, but
Kevin,
I have a
do you
feeling
want
it's
to
for
say?
you.
I definitely have a point of view on this one, but just check it.
Natalia, go for it, by all means. I'll take the one on the education because that's kind of
There's
my
two.
area.
We'll close out with the education one, so we have not forgotten you guys.
There is tremendous opportunity in this. I'm so glad you asked this question. We look at vertical industry-specific AI products all the time. I'll give an example. Using AI in manufacturing to automate a lot of the processes for quality control is one example, and it can be specific to whatever it is that you're manufacturing. It can be specific to sales, to marketing, I mean, you name it. Yes, the value again is in creating the proprietary data, but again, it's really about figuring out how to build this and execute properly, and that in itself is a really hard thing to do. You have to have the right people. You have to, a lot of the times when you're building something from scratch, you have to kind of tough it out and bear a lot of failure until you hit your product market fit, where you figure out what is the urgent pain that and get usage. So I think the way I'll answer this question is I'll kind of refer back to some of the other things I said. But yeah, in a nutshell, it really is about the data. And then it's about just providing value by making things better and easier for people, whether they can be, more productive, whether it can decrease costs, all of these things. AI is diverse, right? It's kind of like saying software development. It can be any industry and for anything. And I think there's a lot of latent demand in these verticals because they just have not thought about things in a data-driven way from the very beginning, like the Googles and the Facebooks of the world.
The next question, I think this is best suited for you, Kevin. You mentioned, this is from Mohammed. You mentioned a talent gap on AI. How do you think higher education universities should prepare their workforce and their students for this new era of AI? Just sort of related to Ravi's question too.
Yeah, so it's a fantastic question, Mohammed. Thank you for asking. It's actually, and Karen will attest to this, it's our 10-year reunion this year. And so actually at our 10-year, I'm going to give a talk to the returning classes about AI. And I'm actually going to address this. So it's kind of on the docket for what I've been thinking about recently. So look, I think high level, just my position on the side, I teach at a bunch of universities here. So MBA level and also undergrad. And I think what I find generally for a lot of students who are interested in AI, the interest either comes from like engineers who are in the engineering and computer science area, or it comes from the business side. And I think in the future, the right mix of people who are, I think, well positioned to work in a lot of these AI roles are going to be people or engineers who understand business and business people who understand the tech, right? So in my class, which is in the business school, I'm trying to make the business folks a little bit more tech, right? And I actually think for a lot of higher education, MBA schools, universities, they should be focusing on that. They think they should be taking their business kids and telling them, hey, you guys need to understand the technology because irrespective of industry, irrespective of area, AI is going to come there in some way, shape, or form. Maybe a different extent, but in general, we're going to definitely see that, right? And so therefore, I think the most important thing for a lot of students is get familiar with the tools that are specific to your industry. Because similar to what Natalia said in the previous question, the AI that healthcare or the AI that doctors use in healthcare is going to be very different to the AI that financial analysts use in a bank, right? So therefore, my kind of big suggestion, and I think universities are sort of alluding to this, is make sure that you understand the tools that are being used in your area. And I think I even see this from an education perspective because when I first started teaching, they asked me to do in the MBA school AI, sort of general AI, right? AI for business. And then recently they said, Kevin, can you teach AI in marketing, AI in finance, AI in management? So they're asking me to teach the different individual slivers because they're realizing that the tools that you're going to use for these different functions are actually going to be very different, right? So I think the most important thing, if I could, not only just students, but everybody on this call here, please try and use some of the tools. I know it's scary. I know it can seem something completely different, but you'll be surprised when you actually start using it and playing with it. It's actually not as difficult as you would imagine at the beginning, right? So I think number one, universities and I think people should start to use the tools, get familiar with the industry specific stuff that they have. And then also, I think that it's going to be people like yourselves out there who think about the best way to use the AI. Okay, so I'll give you an example as a professor, right? One of the things that I think is really useful for a lot of the assessment, right, that's there, is that I think in the future, we're going to see professors take a bunch of their slides, put it into generative AI, and say, hey, come up with multiple choice questions based on my slides, right? I've actually tried that with GPT-4 and the vision component. We've seen that that's actually a really useful output. And so recently I did a session on Gen AI for faculty at one of the universities here. And the minute I showed them that, all the professors were like, huh, this might actually change my life, right? And again, the idea there is I think people like yourselves who are domain experts, once you use the tools, you guys will figure out the best places to ultimately use it. Like folks like Natalia and myself will kind of, hopefully build the tools and use some of them. But I think it's you guys who are going to really make the difference, right? So again, I think you'll find that out by using and playing with it. I think that's super important. And then secondly, once you find the pain points in, let's say, your job or what you're doing, if you can use the AI to make those pain points better or make yourself more efficient, I think you'll just see the benefits of this. So I just think it's kind of empowering students to use the tools and really empowering them to be the ones who are going to take the tools and run. Because even as my role as an educator, I'm not going to be the one coming up with the interesting use cases. It's going to be my students, right? And it's my job on the education side to empower them. And I think likewise, it's all our jobs to figure out how we best use AI. I think if you guys can do that, it's really going to be changing the game going forward. And I'm personally very excited about that. I know there's a lot of fear. I get it, right? But I think if you can find the right way to use it, it's going to make things very different, I think, in a good way. So I'm crossing my fingers, and that's my hope.
Piggyback on that, this is perhaps for current students, Raghu's question in general, for current MBA students who are interested in a career in AI consulting, are there specific types of courses they should be targeting, taking, what enterprises they should be looking at, or maybe types of projects that they should be targeting to prepare themselves for this type of career path?
So AI consulting specifically, Karen, is an interesting one, right? So I think there's a lot of consulting firms that are now trying to build their own sort of AI or technology practice. I still think it's pretty new in many of the consulting firms. So that might be one area to look at. I think the other area from a career perspective is looking at strategy and innovation teams within large corporations, because often the AI job gets delegated to them, right? So even though the strategy or innovation may not have the word AI in it, what I'm finding is a lot of companies, when they come and talk to me, it's a strategy or innovation people who are like, Kevin, I have no idea what kind of AI is or what it can do. Can we talk and can we figure it out? Right? So I think the areas to look at, if you're looking at corporates, strategy and innovation teams, if you're looking at consulting, I think these often have some dedicated sort of AI kind of groups or sort of just practices. So I think that's useful as well. So I think those would be the two places I would initially start in terms of the search.
Perfect. I think our time is actually a little bit past. Well, I want to extend a huge thank you to Natalia, Kevin, for your time, for sharing your stories and insights. I mean, to the audience also for your active participation and your questions. For those, who wish to, I guess, contact you, I believe your LinkedIn profiles are on the event page. So whether it's Natalia, Kevin, or both, feel free. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a great day or evening, whichever time zone you're in. And thank you again. All right.
Thank you all.
Have a great day.
See you
or
all. Thank you for having
evening.
us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.